Hi, and welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm so happy you're here today. We have such a beautiful, wonderful guest. I can't wait to share her story and all the amazing things that she's up to and her wisdom from all of her years of practicing yoga.
Our guest this morning, don't bother to introduce your co-host. That's fine. But our guest this morning is Kia Miller, yoga teacher, writer, lover of life, founder of Radiant Body Yoga. Her mission is to educate and inspire, share techniques and experiences to help you unlock your hidden potential and thrive in life. And I was reading your bio, Kia. Oh my goodness. From what I understand, you've led this titanic personal narrative, and it was awesome to see the number of intersections that we have between us all in our stories. And I'm just so excited to meet you and talk to you and introduce our listeners to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So
I wonder if you could talk first of all about where you grew up, and I as I understand that was in the Falkland Islands, and I wonder if you could talk to us about this kind of. I personally I have such a romantic interest in the beautiful kind of cosmic spiritual experiences that young children have. 5, 6, 7, and they don't maybe realize it at the time, but we have them, and they're just so gorgeous. And I wonder, you mentioned that happened to you, and it kind of lit up for me. And I wonder if you could talk about that, about growing up on the farm in the Falkland Islands, and these kind of gorgeous experiences in nature that you had there.
Well, the Falkland Islands are so remote. They're in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, 300 miles off the east coast, eastern coast of Argentina. And there's nothing there. I grew up on what we called a settlement, which was 110,000 acres. My father was the manager. And there were about 30 people living in the settlement, counting children. So maybe 8 houses and then a few shepherds' houses sort of out in the far corners of the land. So it was a very small community. And I loved horses. I loved being outdoors. And so from a very early age, nature was my playground. I was on my own more than I was with anybody else. I was with my horses, I was with my dogs, and I would spend hours just out riding from as early as I could. So my experiences were that really just of being held by nature and feeling very secure in nature. I didn't grow up in an environment where there was fear. I could fall in a ditch or I could be thrown off my horse, but that might be the worst that could happen. No boogeyman was going to come get me because everybody knows everybody else. And, we're all looking out for each other. So I think that first spiritual experience for me was being with nature, immersed in nature.
I feel like that's a through line that's carried on for you. Because one of the things that really spoke to me when we first met and we were having this conversation with Yoga Gives Back as the ambassadors of the year this year, and you were talking about rituals and how the rituals connect you to nature and keep you like present and aware and feeling like attuned with nature. Can you talk a little bit about that? What kind of rituals and things do you integrate into your daily practice and into your life?
Well, for me, the ritual of going outside or the ritual of opening my window, no matter how cold it is outside, when I first sit down to meditate, to feel nature inside as well as outside, but also the ritual of honoring the elements, the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the ether, and recognizing the elemental makeup that we all are, and tuning in on that level. Those kinds of rituals always help me to remember spirit. They help me to remember the greater organizing power of the universe. So it can right size my mind very quickly when I do rituals like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. The microcosm and the macrocosm and the elements outside of us reflected with the elements inside of us. And I think, with the yoga tradition and Ayurveda and Sankhya, we see this dance or this play, always this mirror happening between the big elements and then what's happening also within us as well. Yeah.
Yay.
Gosh, it's incredible, kind of to think about this kind of integration. I was just thinking about how for so much of my childhood I was playing the Atari, and I have a very kind of dreary remembrance of that time. And yet all the time that I spent outside seems like it glowed. And in the memories that I have, like there was such beauty, like everything kind of has a kind of golden glow about it when I think about the times that I was outside. But I think about all the times I was inside, it just seems really dreary. And it could almost lead someone to regret if you didn't, appreciate everything that happens to you.
What is that musical instrument that you mentioned? I don't even think I know what that is.
Oh, the Atari. It's a
yes,
game.
it is. It's a musical instrument.
No, it's not.
It's a game.
Like a video game.
You must go out of the loop.
That's fantastic. Yes, the Atari is very much a musical instrument where you sit and you have one button with your left thumb and you have a joystick with your right. And then what you try to do is synchronize your breath with the movement on the television screen. You
were outside exploring nature while the Atari was happening. It's finished now. Its time is ended, I think.
The other thing that strikes me is that I was also like experiencing in my family life like total chaos. I was having a lot of traumatic experiences in the home. We were getting break-ins, there was abuse, there was fighting, there was awful things happening. And yet when I have these beautiful memories of being outside and they're very precious to me. And something that I think also that we share is this kind of contradiction of, having beautiful spiritual experiences, but also like right in the midst of some things that were quite traumatizing. Do you feel comfortable talking about that at all?
Oh, sure.
Because I think one thing that you mentioned was waking up to tracer fire outside your window.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, even before that, it was a pretty emotionally volatile household that I grew up in. And so nature and animals were my safe place where I always felt safe. I always felt connected. I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt, all of those things that the soul desires. And yes, then I woke up one morning, which is a funny story, actually. So in 1982, the Argentinians invaded the Falkland Islands. And about 2 days before that, I was in a school class, in my geography class. And there'd been rumblings of us getting invaded. And but, it was way before any information moved very quickly. And my geography teacher said, "Oh, there's as much likelihood of us getting invaded as there is a witch flying overhead on a broomstick." And that was like, I think 2 or maybe 3 days before. And then, I was in a boarding school, and I woke up and there were tracer bullets flying past the window, and it was a very interesting time. So I was, 13 then. I went through this phase because I'd been to boarding school in Argentina from 7 to 11, where I'd been introduced to sort of organized religion. I went to, I guess I grew up Protestant, but then I went to the Protestant church on the weekends. But if that was closed, they sent us to the Catholic one instead, which I was.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
If I think about it now, I'm like, oh, that's great. That's perfect for me. I loved that. I was sort of happy in both places. But then I remember when I got pulled back to the Falkland Islands, walking along this beautiful road with the seawall right next to you and the ocean right there, and just deciding to myself, I don't think I believe in God, you know. And having that moment, but I was always spiritually connected. But I remember that moment, and that was just shortly before the Argentinians invaded, and then our whole worlds were rocked.
Did you have a definition of God pretty clearly formed at that point? Or was it different now?
I think my definition is probably as it was when I grew up, which was my own form, which was formless. It was just the experience of, I never felt alone out in nature. I mean, there's just that experience of a presence that I didn't know what to call it. And then, of course, it was being shaped at boarding school as I'm, going through the rosary or whatever it was. So it started to be shaped into something. And then I decided it wasn't that. And, and so that my spiritual quest has taken many shapes and forms. It's been an interesting journey. I saw many things during that war, as you would, or conflict, as it was called. And one of those was actually kneeling in front of somebody who was passing, a soldier.
He was dying.
Dying.
Yeah.
He was dying, and I just got that sense of the soul moving up. Of the energy leaving. I got that sense. And again, I couldn't put words to it, and I was pulled out of the room very quickly after that, but I had that sense of that happening. And so death's been an interesting doorway for me. When my father died, it wasn't a dream, but I was asleep, and he just said to me, "It's okay. I'm okay." And I knew he was okay. So I didn't grieve for him at all. And then when my mother passed just a few years ago, I had that experience of her personality, of her shedding her personality and feeling her soul for a few hours, just sitting by her bedside, holding her hand as it got progressively colder and colder, and having this experience of the personality gone and just this pure love of the soul. And all of the personality things and areas where we've been in conflict dissolving in that moment and having no more relevance. It was such an interesting experience. Anyway, I don't know how really I got onto death, but here we are.
Well, we're talking about the Falklands War and how and how you're kind of living in a kind of idyllic villa in the middle with like 30,000 sheep around you. I don't know how they fit all those sheep on an island, but, and then suddenly you're confronted with death as a very young age, and that's, how does that affect a human being? How does that shape a person as they become a young adult?
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe also because I grew up on a farm, I was used to death. Because I saw
like
it
a
all the
dead
time.
animal,
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And nothing. It was never. it was never death for the sake of death. It was either something died for illness or age, or it was death because, you know, we were consuming the animals in you know, for those purposes.
For whatever
So
reason, people want to do that.
yes. Well, that's a whole other story. You know, not in that realm, I did decide I was going to be a vegetarian somewhere in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe because of that too, right? I think sometimes, I don't know, it can be hard. You know, the animals are like friends at some point, and you feel like, wait a second,
They are.
I
I
don't
think
want to eat
so.
my friend.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How we are.
Yeah.
It's interesting how sensitive we are as children, for
Yeah.
the most part. You know, that we really get the
Yeah.
whole holistic part of nature. We're more curious. Yeah.
I like, though, that you did bring up the death, because I feel like, you know, you have a depth of spiritual practice, and not just practice, but like that current, you know, going through you. And I feel very much that death and spirituality, or death and you know, that universal consciousness or that spirit are very much interconnected and very much part of each other. Like you're saying, you know, in that death, the spirit becomes so tangible almost.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
But when it's in the body, it's like we're very much attached to the body. And so it's, again, like this really interesting mirror, or like juxtaposition, that we're like actually very much attached to death, because what we're attached to is going, it's dying all the time. And then, but then there's this other sort of aspect of this spirit, this everlasting, ever living essence that we can connect to, but is a little more ethereal, maybe, while we're stuck in this meat suit, I guess.
Meat suit.
Speaking of,
Yes.
food.
You know,
on a skeleton embodied by a ghost.
Sorry, go ahead.
A meat suit hung on a skeleton and embodied by a ghost.
Oh. Oh my goodness. That's quite the image. Wow.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, though. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's great. I forgot what I was going to say.
You shocked her. You shocked her into.
I was gonna say that I remember growing up. I grew up in the countryside, and I remember, like any young American, I was given a gun, you know, quite early, and so I had this little .22 rifle. I think I was 11, and I would go out and I would shoot things with it, and there was a huge flock of starlings flew over the house. I said, "Oh, that's awesome!" And I shot up into the sky, and I was in the backyard. My mouth dropped as one of the birds dropped right out of the sky into our backyard, and I'm like, "Oh!" And it was still alive. And I went into the house and I told my mommy, that there was a bird in the backyard that I had shot out of the sky and it was still alive. She said, "Well, that's not very nice, is it? You have to finish it." I'm like, "Oh." And I had to go back into the backyard and shoot this bird to death, and it didn't finish the second, third, or fourth time I shot it. And it's a terrible story. It's a terrible story, and it left me with the feeling like I don't ever want any part of that experience ever again. I don't want anything to do with this, and I saw no joy in it, and I saw no satisfaction in that, and I had no desire to be a part of it.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I think that, for me at least, when we're living, let's just say it this way, when we're living really connected to nature, where we started off our conversation, connected to nature, connected to the cycles of life, connected to our right-sized nature in the midst of everything around us, I think we're more likely to walk through life with respect of all living beings. You know, as our First Nation brothers and sisters did for them, you know. So when we're disconnected from nature in that way, I think it's easier to look at nature as something that we might consume, as opposed to just be a part of. She is our mother,
Yeah.
and everything that lives on this planet is, in essence, you know, our brothers and sisters. We're all part of the same creative consciousness. That which created all is in everything, everywhere. And so in that case, we're going to, at least with that belief system, and I'm not saying everybody has that belief system, but when one does, it's much easier to walk through life in a state of reverence for everything that is, as opposed to feeling the need to consume things in an unconscious way.
Yeah, in an unconscious way.
And and I feel like that's where so much of the suffering is coming right now, is just the unconsciousness, the conditioning that we're all on this path of yoga trying so hard to break ourselves free of, that we could just glimpse beyond the collective conditioning, beyond the social conditioning, to see beyond, where we could glimpse into a way of living harmoniously, a way of living respectfully, a way of taking only what we need, a way of walking in harmony. And in my own experience, you know, it's not a quick fix. It takes time to harness our inner vitality, our energy, to understand how to break free of the conditioning, to learn, you know, to learn and recognize the part of your mind that isn't the conditioned part, and to begin to really work with that. Yeah.
I do struggle to walk in harmony, but I it's okay walking beside her. I can do that. I can be
heard
next.
That joke my whole life.
I can be next to harmony. I wonder, how did all of this affect your family? Like 1982, you're 12, 13, I think you said. And the conflict was over in a month, maybe 2 months.
74 days, I think it was.
74 days. Wow.
Something like that.
And your people were allowed to keep their land and stay there, and then but that still must have kind of disturbed everyone.
It was very disturbing. I because you're both so prone to laughter, and I love laughter and joy. Just for the sake of levity here, I'll just say I had this glimpse of, you know, I love a man in uniform.
Yeah, it made an impression on you.
That came from living my little life there in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly having, you know, uniforms everywhere.
Yeah,
Men on your side.
Of course, it affected all of us. But you know what? I wasn't politicized at 13.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't understand politics. I had just been, from 7 to 11, I had been living in Argentina 9 months of the year at boarding school.
Right.
And Argentinians were my friends.
Yeah.
I spoke the language. They were my friends. So when they came and they took over our farm, and, you know, they were rough on my father, and they took over. They took over the farm. I actually went out and I was fishing and trading fish for fruit with the young Argentinian soldiers who honestly weren't that much older than I was.
Wow.
So,
And so when the British came to retake the islands, they actually took our farm first because they had contacted my mother, who lived in England at the time. They had no up-to-date ordnance survey maps.
Oh.
And so she drew them the area that she knew the best, which was our farm. So that's where they came to retake the island. So the
God.
Argentinians are running out one side and the British are coming in the other. We're waking up to these, sounds of bombs and whatever. And my father runs off to meet the British. And meanwhile, I slip off down to run off to my friends, the Argentinians, who
Right.
I'd been chatting
Trading.
with and trading with. That's a whole other story. That was a very intense experience as well. So yes, it did dramatically change our lives, because a whole way of life was disturbed. And after that, Margaret Thatcher's time, she was privatizing left, right, and center in England. And so then she decided that the islands should be privatized as well. In other words, anybody who owned land, who was an overseas landlord, and the people who owned Port St. Carlos were Irish. So all overseas landlords had to sell. And the idea was that they would sell and the farms would be split up from 110,000 acres into 5 parts. My brother actually bought a part of it. But what happened was you then dismantled a whole way of life, which was to live together in an interdependent community, which had everybody in the community had their function, had their support. Now suddenly you have 5 different farmers on isolated properties with really not enough land to make it viable because it's acres per sheep, not sheep per acre in the Falkland Islands. And so it changed life dramatically, actually, from the way it was when I was living there. So the inevitable change, of course, we see it everywhere. But that propelled, I think, the greatest change that people experienced in the islands. Maybe even more so than the conflict itself was the change of life afterwards.
I was struck when we came online that I wasn't exactly looking at an LA yogi, but I was like, oh, look, she's an Argentine. She has the kind of, there's like a flavor there. And Harmony, I've been to Buenos Aires and taught yoga in Argentina and loved it. I had to personally go buy my own hot sauce because they don't use hot sauce in Argentina, which came as a shock. But all the same, I was like, wow, you really have a kind of flair for. I was expecting maybe someone more British.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but
I can be British. If I've just watched the British show, I'll be very British. But I am definitely one of those people that I blend in with my environment. And so I know people here who are British who have their British accent still. And then I know others like me who tend to take on wherever we are. And the American accent is insidious.
Yeah. Even in London now you hear it.
Yeah.
And so you went to London to model. Is that right? Or to England?
I did. Well, I went from the Falkland Islands to England after my father passed. I stayed in the islands for a little while and then I decided I should go be with my mother. And I actually took the QE2. She's She's
The
one of
Queen Elizabeth
Cunard,
II.
the Queen Elizabeth II. She's one of the huge Cunard cruise ships. And it was me, and it was my grandma, and one other woman, and then the whole rest of the Cunard
Wow. Men.
was military people.
Yeah.
And we went via Ascension. We went to England, and I remember some cute young officer. I was still very young at the time, flirting
Yeah.
outrageously with me,
Yeah.
telling me, "Oh, you'll be a model someday." And I don't know
Yeah.
if he planted the seed or who did, but
Wow.
I did one of those random things, like I entered a competition and
Yeah.
sent in some photos and won the competition. And
Wow.
then, my mother thought I was going to fail all my A-level exams
Yeah.
because I got rheumatoid fever and
Oh.
glandular fever right about the same time. So she agreed to let me go to a modeling school in Manchester,
Wow.
which is, we
in
weren't
the
far from Manchester.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
In the
I
north.
fell in love with that. And
Yeah.
I did pass all my exams.
Yeah.
But then I was already very much liking my modeling life. I went to university for a term to please my mother, only to find out that I really didn't want to be there. And I was already earning such good money as a model that
Wow.
I turned in that direction instead.
And so how did you, from this, move into yoga? Where did that fit in with your
Well, the funny
lifestyle?
thing is that
I have these on the question list.
I know. I can
we're
ask my
leading
own
there,
questions.
but there's a whole process here.
go for it. What's the process?
No, she.
Well, no, I want to know.
Well, she got involved in documentary film.
Okay. Well, let her tell us.
But even before that, it's funny that the reason I got into yoga, or my first touchstone with yoga, was a Raquel Welch book on beauty.
Oh, nice!
That's awesome.
And she was doing a little bit of stretching in there, was she?
Because she actually had the Bikram postures.
Right. Yeah.
Which she later got sued by, which is when they decided, that you couldn't patent a yoga sequence.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, if it's good enough for Raquel, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
I wanted to be good enough for Raquel.
That's awesome.
Most people these days, of course, are like,
who's Raquel? No, I have a very, very vivid image of her in my mind right now. Standing on some rock with some kind of cave girl outfit.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
And so where did you take your first yoga class? Did that like kind of gave you some inspiration, but
yeah, then I actually did that sequence on my own all the time. I always had discipline. Again, I think growing up on a farm, you always have jobs. You're used to doing stuff.
Yeah.
And so I did that sequence a lot. And then when I moved to London, I went to this studio on the Edge Street in Kensington. I think it was called the Edge Street Studio, or I can't remember what it was called now. It's still there.
Okay.
And they have another one. I'm having a blank on the name. So that was it. There was a lovely teacher there called Godfrey Defro. He was an Ashtangi, but he created kind of his own style.
Yeah, he's quite famous in the UK. People maybe in the North America may not have heard of him, but when I was living in England, it was like, oh, Godfrey, he's a big deal. Yeah.
Yes. He was way out there. I remember going with my girlfriend to his house, and there he is, and he's like, practicing yoga, and he's virtually naked, and we're thinking, this is really strange.
Yeah.
But he had clearly just come from Mysore, and he had that whole vibe. But that was my first introduction to that kind of vibe.
Wow! And did you love it? Did you fall in love with it immediately, or were you like, "Whoa, this is far out"?
He was quite far out, so I moved on to a couple of teachers that that were in the studio, a woman, Kati, I will never forget, schooling me on, keeping yoga props correctly.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. A
And
little
I actually,
Iyengar influence.
like there's a correct way to use a chair.
Yes.
and
You're
put
supposed to
things
sit in
away
it,
neatly
honestly.
when you're done.
Right. Yes.
But I've actually always appreciated that kind of teacher. I like somebody who can really tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so funny. And so then, but this evolved obviously into Kundalini Yoga.
Yes, it did. So I moved to the United States. I started to go to Yoga Works on Main Street. And then I was doing Ashtanga still with Chuck Miller and Marty, but I was getting into Vinyasa classes as well. I had a brief year and a half stint in Northern California where I practiced Ashtanga with John
Belinsky. Yeah, my good buddy, JB. I was wondering if it was in the studio down south in LA, or had John already moved to Marin? Okay.
It was in Marin. It was the yoga studio in Marin where I practiced with him in Mill Valley.
Yeah.
And actually, he was the one who got me into, 6 a.m. Mysore.
Yeah.
Wow.
He just kept saying, come, come, come. And then I'd show up and I'd be yawning away. And then he'd say, just have some coffee before you come. Yeah. And I was like, oh, wait. I get to have my tea? Yeah. A black tea before I come to yoga? Oh, that's worth getting up for.
Yeah.
And it was Leah was there as well at the same time.
Yes, she was. Yeah.
Were you more drawn to JB than to Leah? I think people went in different, like people went either one direction or the other.
I loved both, but I was mainly with him. But when I wanted a softer approach, I went to her. But equally, both loved them.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And then for Kundalini, I just, we'd moved back to Los Angeles. Well, actually, no, it was before then that I met Guru Singh. I was still in my modeling days, and there were two women that I just thought, wow, whatever they have, I want what they have. And what they had in common was Guru Singh, was Kundalini Yoga.
Wow. And they were models that you were working with or like in connection with?
Well, one was a far higher level model than I was. She was supermodel status.
Oh.
And she took me to my first Guru Singh class.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, because I'm an Ashtangi at heart,
Right.
Then,
yeah.
Like, oh, now I have to go get my workout in. Like, what was all this mumbo jumbo stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like a seed took root, obviously.
Well, Guru Singh took root. I mean, I'd never met anybody like him. I'd never met anybody like him. I still don't think I've ever met anybody like him. He's one of the most unique human beings on the planet. And so I kept going to his classes. I was curious. And then, one day I had an experience after doing a strong navel set where my mind just went quiet. All the masks dissipated, fell away. And I just remember having this experience of like, oh, that's who I am. And then I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked.
Yeah.
I dived into teacher training shortly after that. And and then the journey just kept getting deeper, and I made the decision. I was like, I want to dig a deep well. I'd already dug a very deep well in Ashtanga. And then I was like, I'm going to dig a deep well here. So I did. I just studied and studied and studied and studied until I got to the point where I was like, okay, now I get this system. Now I got to figure out, like, where's this coming from? And so I started to study in different Kundalini lineages to I think really reconfirm and confirm and, the teachings that I had to get a bit more of a sense of the roots of them. And that was an important process for me. Yeah.
When I came back from Korea in '98, I got my first yoga teaching job at Yoga in Austin, Texas.
Yes.
Do you know Mitab and Guru Karam? You must do.
I know Mitab not well, but I did a gong course with him once, and I just loved him. He's another cosmic being.
He is a cosmic being.
Yes.
Has the largest comic book collection in Texas.
Oh, I love that.
He's an amazing dude. And a lot of the people that I was with there in Austin, they were, definitely like you, making a transition from Ashtanga into Kundalini. And I just ended up going in the opposite direction. But there's definitely a particular vibe that comes with a Kundalini studio, and like doing Ashtanga yoga on a white bare rug. Everyone's wearing white, and and it's like were you drawn to that aspect of it, of a kind of being steeped in a culture, whereas with Ashtanga you could kind of sometimes feel like you're working out at a gym?
Yeah, yes. I mean, my first love will always be the Mysore room. Walking into an Ashtanga Mysore room and having that certain feeling of everybody in their practice and the teacher moving around, adjusting, there's something so special about that to me. That's priceless. Nothing could touch that in so many ways. But what I got in the Kundalini world was the holistic perspective of yoga. Yoga is not just the mat and that practice. Yoga is the lifestyle. Yoga is the ashram. Yoga is the food. Yoga is the ethics. Yoga is about transformation of consciousness. It was like the whole toolkit became clear to me. And what I loved, which I think in the Iyengar and the Ashtanga tradition has been so held back, was the abundance of powerful pranayama practices that kind of blow the lid off of who you think you are in the moment, until you start to recognize that space and place that is not bound by the personality and all the needs and desires and attachments and aversions of the personality. And so the breath work, the meditations, nobody in all my Ashtanga years had ever taught me to meditate. So now having all these different practices, and then delving in and learning about mantra. Of course, we have the Ashtanga mantra at the beginning, that sort of reverence and honoring of the Guru. But then I'm getting introduced to mantra in a much different, methodology, chanting out loud, over and over and over and over and over again for 11 minutes, 31 minutes, 62 minutes, starting to do deep meditations with mantra, with mudra, and learning how to focus the mind. I mean, these tools that I learned in the Kundalini world, and then going for 16 years with my husband to White Tantric Yoga in New Mexico, and 9 hours a day, deep practices, awake at 2:30 in the morning. It's like we laugh so much these days, and we're like, wow, we were honed at that time. Like clearly, we were chiseled. And it was amazing yoga, meditation, boot camp. And all the clothing and all of that, everything that went with it, I never really minded. I'll just finish here because then I got to go.
You do,
But Guru Singh really always, if I ever need a different perspective on anything, I go to him. And I'm like, Guru Singh, why are we all here? And we're all wearing white. And it just feels like a cult to me. And, And he just reframed it. He's like, you know what? He's like, you come up that road and you enter the, Ramdas Puri land. And he's like, and you leave your old identity behind. He's like, we're all neutral here. We put on the white, we come in, and we're the same. We leave the personality behind. And I was like, okay, I can get with that. And I got with that. And I just never really bothered about all of it. I did what I was asked. I covered my head to teach. I wore white. I did what I was asked. I was respectful of my teachers. It never was a thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he reframed a couple of times for me different things, and I just, I rolled with it. And I always had my foot in many different rooms. I'm in the Ashtanga room still. I'm going to Iyengar classes
Mm-hmm.
3 times a week. I'm like Ashtanga straight into Iyengar class, and then maybe Kundalini in the afternoon. Like, to me, it was everything, and that's what I ended up teaching was, a combination of everything I ever learned that was working for me. So,
And that's Radiant Body Yoga.
yes, that's Radiant Body Yoga.
And how could people find that?
KiaMiller.com.
KiaMiller.com.
Kia Miller Yoga on social media things.
I would love another 3 hours to talk with you at some point in the future. I think you're
let's
amazing.
do a follow-up.
I would love to follow you up. Please.
Love you guys.
Love you too.
All right.